Shall we get started? Hi, welcome. And welcome to folks online as well. So according to our brief schedule here, I'm going to give a presentation about Horizon 2050. And then we'll open up for any questions folks might have, questions or comments. And that also applies to the folks online. If you want to raise your hand and offer a question or submit a question in the chat, you're welcome to do so. I'll talk for 10 to 15 minutes or so, and then we can let you digest that and get to any comments or questions you might have.
Did you confirm that folks online can hear clearly?
Yeah, I was talking with Eve earlier, so I'll just launch into it. Familiar audience here, for the most part, so some of you may be familiar with this material. Nonetheless, I'm Jason Leon. I work for Spokane Regional Transportation Council. I've been the project manager for Horizon 2050, which is our long-range transportation plan. But before I talk about Horizon 2050, I'll just offer to some of those who may not be familiar, what is SRTC. So our agency is both a metropolitan planning organization, which is a federal designation. We're also a regional transportation planning organization, which is a state designation. So we work to collaborate with our agency partners within the region of Spokane County to work on transportation problems and potential solutions and investments. Much of that is embodied in Horizon 2050, our long-range transportation plan.
Well, no, I tried to move it.
So the SRTC and all of our projects and programs are guided by our guiding principles shown here. The guiding principles really help direct our work and provide a platform and foundation for how we do our work, including the long-range transportation plan. So the core piece of our work is, as I mentioned, Horizon 2050. This is an update to our current plan, which is called Horizon 2045, which was adopted in late 2021. Now we're moving toward the process of adopting this plan later this year. A long-range transportation plan or metropolitan transportation plan, a couple of different terms that it's known as. It's a long-term vision, so it looks out toward a long horizon to the year 2050. It looks at regional transportation needs, so across all modes of transportation, again, in our planning area of Spokane County. And it's a coordinated planning process. So throughout the last couple of years, we've had different projects working with our stakeholders at the agency, city, and local jurisdiction level, and the state. We've also had public involvement activities over the last several months to help inform, what people are thinking about that use a transportation system. Last bullet here, it says fiscally constrained, and what that means is Horizon 2050, any projects and programs that are identified in the plan are capped by reasonably expected revenue over the next 25 years. So in this process, we're developing the long-range plan. Many common themes have come up, and these aren't necessarily new. Some of these are carrying over from Horizon 2045. But a focus on the maintenance and preservation of our existing system, understanding the funding challenges that go along with that. How do we actually properly keep our system in a state of good repair? Safety and security, concerns from folks who are on our roadways and what we see in trends in terms of fatal and serious injury type crashes. Opportunities in technology. How can we leverage technology to make sure our system operates efficiently across all modes? And then also, as I mentioned, a multimodal system. So we are focused on the road system, which is also used by our transit system, freight, also active transportation, bicyclists and pedestrians, and making sure that those are all integrated and work together efficiently. So the draft of Horizon 2050 includes 4 chapters. The first 2 chapters talk about the role of SRTC and current conditions in our planning area. Chapter 3 focuses on future conditions. And then the final full chapter is chapter 4. And this really gets at what I'll be talking about mostly today, and that is our financial forecasts, our projects and program areas where investments will occur, strategies to make the transportation system work better, and also that physical constraint that I mentioned in transportation needs that we've identified over the last couple of years of work. So what did we find in our efforts to develop Horizon 2050? Well, in one of our public outreach activities, we asked folks to prioritize how they would spend investment dollars. And the outcome of that is shown here in this pie graph, and you'll note that the largest consideration, I guess the response, was maintenance and preservation, so taking care of our existing system. That's followed by, there was a pretty strong interest in active transportation investment, followed by safety and then transit, and then other ones are shown on there as well, have smaller slices of the pie. We also look at going forward, how is the region going to grow? So within Spokane County, we forecasted 120,000 new residents, so getting up to around 670,000 people by 2050, and 75,000 new jobs. And so with those numbers, we also assign where people might live and work. So that chart in the upper, that map in the upper left indicates growth in housing per acre, with the darker red being higher growth areas and new housing. And then the lower right, that being the same kind of metric, but with employment, with the darker green indicating where employment is growing in density per acre, new jobs per acre. So that helps us look at how people are going to travel on the network, which the commute trip is a very common trip that people are doing, and understanding what that creates in terms of demand, people traveling on our system. I mentioned safety, so SRTC led a project the last couple of years called the Regional Safety Action Plan. And so what we did is look at occurrences of crashes around our network, and with a focus on fatal and serious injury crashes, and identified these particular intersections and corridors that are highlighted here in red to create a better understanding of where there's concentration of crashes, why they're occurring, and what are some strategies to mitigate that. On the congestion side, we manage a process called the congestion management process, which looks at the most congested corridors on our system. And the darker red indicates, and many of you probably seem familiar to you who may drive around the area, that have our higher congested conditions. And it looks at a data-driven approach to understand when this is occurring, and then what are some strategies to mitigate congestion on those corridors. So how we'll get there, and this, let me add that this is a pretty high level overview. There's lots of detail in Horizon 2050, but these are some of the higher level stuff that I'm relaying to you today. But how we'll get there is really the chapter 4 content. And one of the elements that's identified in there are larger capital improvement projects in the short term, as in the next 6 years. And this map is tied to a key in chapter 4 itself, which names all these projects across different road improvements and also some transit projects. And then longer term projects, which are beyond 2032 to up to 2050, investments in our network that include, again, larger capital investments, in many ways increasing capacity in some instances, or providing high capacity transit. I'm not going to list all these projects, but I'll give you some samples of what are shown on those 2 maps. I'll just do it by geography. So start in the Valley area. Some of the north-south corridors are undergoing either bridge or capacity upgrades in the next several years. There's a transit project, a high capacity bus rapid transit that STA will be planning in the valley as well. In the Spokane region, top of mind is completion of the North Spokane corridor and its ultimate connection to I-90. Also completion of Division bus rapid transit on North Division Street. Latah Bridge rehabilitation is a key connector on the Sunset Highway and making sure that bridge is brought back up to standard. And then US 195 and I-90 projects. Those are a suite of different projects along the 195 corridor that help address access, congestion, and safety issues. And then finally, on the West Plains, a couple of different projects are identified in the plan, including the 18th and 21st Avenue corridor, which is congestion relief and redundancy type project south of US 2 to create another access through that area. Then also the Craig Road I-94 Lakes connection, which is a reconstruction of Craig Road to create a new and improved connection to I-90 and providing different access to Fairchild Air Force Base and the West Plains. So outside of the regionally significant project, there's also program areas. Sometimes we refer to them as program buckets within these different categories. And these are also essential projects that are typically capital investments or different programs to enhance our transportation system. Just a few examples of these that fall into these different categories. On the safety side, Airport Drive and Spotted Road, grade separation on the West Plains near the airport. SRTC is working to conduct a safety education campaign. So going back to that high injury network and why crashes are occurring. So if you dig into the data, there's a fair amount of crashes where there's an indication of distracted driving or impaired driving. So that's an effort to help the driving public become, I guess, better in terms of choices that they're doing when they're driving. On the active transportation side, again, those walking and biking modes, some key regional trail projects, including the Argonne Road Gap, near that Argonne intersection for the Centennial Trail on Upriver Drive, and the Fish Lake Trail connection to the Centennial Trail in Spokane. And then we've identified some issues, I guess you could say, in Horizon 2050 that we plan to explore more with some additional study work over the next couple of years. One includes an I-90 corridor study, identifying really what are needs across, holistic needs across the entire I-90 corridor as it travels through our valley. A transportation funding study, which really gets at what I mentioned earlier, those funding challenges that we have and what are some options to explore for that. And then on the freight side, one of the needs identified is freight truck parking study. So mandated stops that drivers need to do as we have lots of trucking and freight that goes through our region. And do we have the necessary amount of freight truck parking to allow that to happen? So another element that helps focus our investments in Horizon 2050 are priority networks. So we have different modal priority networks where we try to focus our investments in terms of maintenance and preservation and improvements. First is a vehicle priority network, so those major arterial roads in our region. The freight priority network, those are key truck, freight, and rail connections, and also our airports. The transit priority network, so this relies on STA's planning efforts to, as they build out their high performance transit network over the next couple of decades, at least certainly the next 10 years at least. And then last, a bicycle priority network, which demonstrates our existing facilities, but also shows where new connections can and should be made to create a better interconnected network. And this increasingly is for bicyclists, and we'll see probably other folks using this as well on different micromobility devices, whether it be scooters or skateboards or what have you. So on the expenditure side, I talked about on the left is the program areas, those program buckets. The next is really significant projects. So those are both respectively just a bit over $2 billion over the next 25 years. see on the right there that most of our expenditures are allocated toward preservation and maintenance and operations. And this is capped to assign the $16.1 billion in reasonably expected revenue through 2050. But one thing that's noted in the plan, holding these values constant in each of these categories, is that the need in preservation is significantly higher to keep our entire system in a state of good repair. So that's something that is a challenge that we face, but that's the reality, and it's shown in the crosshatch what an estimate would be to keep that system in a state of good repair across all roads in Spokane County. And then last, since this is the long timeline of a project and a plan, lots of uncertainty here about how we're going to do in terms of technology trends and growth. A lot of that is here with us today, but we just expect that to continue to develop and evolve over time. Starting with autonomous and connected vehicles, you know, that the seeds of that technology is really here today and actually really exists today. If you go to some different cities, you can have driverless robotaxis. We expect that to have an impact on how people get around over the next couple of decades, both on the personal side and on the freight side. And it has a bearing in terms of how vehicles can start communicating with one another and also communicating with the infrastructure itself. And that kind of ties back to those efficiencies that I mentioned earlier in technology to help make the system operate safely and efficiently. On the transportation system management side, lots of change happening there in terms of how everything is connected, AI, and how can we leverage those as transportation system managers to make sure that things are working smoothly. And then last, just on the vehicle technology side, what we see today, and I just expect this to continue to grow and evolve, is electrification of vehicles and also different alternative fuels, both in freight and personal vehicles. So last couple of slides here in terms of what's happening with this. So thanks for coming today. Our open house. The draft of Horizon 2050 was broadly publicly released on October 10th. That November 10th date that's highlighted there, that's the end of our 30-day public comment period. So this is a good time if you're reviewing the plan, if you have any particular comments or questions, to get that to us before or by November 10th. We'll be considering those comments and taking that final draft to our SRTC committees later in November. Then ultimately, if all is going as scheduled, bringing that to our board of directors in December for final approval, and that'll be on December 11th. So I think I covered everything I wanted to cover today. And hopefully that inspired some thought, and hopefully you learned something. And if you have any comments or questions, I'm happy to open it up to folks online or folks in the room. And if there's none, that's okay too, but.
I'd like to ask sort of a question about the technology trends, vehicle and infrastructure communication.
Yeah.
So I know like nationally, the ability to have the communication between like traffic signals in their states and vehicles and stuff like that is pretty limited, and there's sort of early efforts in that. But of course, one of the prerequisites to that is there like networking between the signals where they can share their current states and stuff like that in a central, traffic management center or something like that here in Spokane?
Yeah, well, partially. So, so we do have a transportation management, the SRTMC, the Transportation Management Center, and they, monitor our network. They have cameras and things, and they do a lot in terms of incident response and getting information to travelers. I would say over time, they could do more in terms of how you can coordinate signals across our region. That's not all interconnected, and it's kind of a bit responsibility of the jurisdictions. So there's some, who's responsible for what kind of question, and that would have to move to sort of a different model for that to be fully realized. And investment would need to occur too, of course. Yeah, so we do have, we have some corridors in our region, and it's not necessarily managed by the SRTMC, it might be managed by that jurisdiction. Where they're coordinated corridors where the signal phases are more controlled centrally, right? We also have a number of signals that are still, I guess, older technologies where to literally change that signal phase, you have to go out to the box and open it up and, turn some keys and stuff. So, yeah, so there's, we have a long ways to go, I guess, to get there. I think we did that, well, I know we did a smart mobility plan, last year in 2024. And one of those recommendations coming out of that is how can we move toward a better coordinated system in terms on the traffic signal side of things. One thing that we can do and we advocate for in Horizon 2050 is making sure that we build out the communications network. So wireless technologies, like where you can put in fiber optics and like a new road construction, or if you're reconstructing a road, just to make sure you have that kind of communications infrastructure that can help facilitate new technologies down the road. That's one thing we can lay the groundwork for and advocate for in Horizon 2050 and some of our other work. But yeah, that's an ongoing conversation, and I know it's kind of a long, convoluted answer, but
It's a complex,
yeah,
thing to try to do, so,
yeah,
Just to add to that, not only did you do the smart mobility or complete a smart mobility plan last year, but in our work plan in the next year or two is to review the architecture in this area. So, I mean, you hit on a really, really complicated topic for sure. How you prepare, right? A lot of that technology exists, but we have old signal boxes and we have just things that make it more difficult. So putting some of that base planning together, and one of those activities is looking at the architecture of this area, and sort of talking about how we will move forward, as Jason was talking about, just making sure everybody's on the same page so that we don't miss opportunities when we head in that direction. We can be prepared for when that day comes. There's also a lot of policy pieces that have to be put in place. If you just think about, the conundrum that happened with, we're gonna use this kind of plug to charge cars or this kind of plug, right? So you have to have these standards now so that, yeah, we don't have to all buy pigtails and convert one to another. So yeah, there's a lot of layers of complexity to put in, and we're trying to stay ahead, at least on the planning side, to put those pieces in place.
yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Lois. Yeah, that's gonna be, I think, on the implementation side, help us out and help the region out as a whole, is doing that ITS architecture plan or updating it. So that'll be a coordinated effort, and that'll start some of those conversations, I think, about, because yeah, back to just the technology question, there's some folks in our region that are operating a certain software platform, and then others operating a different software platform, and they can't necessarily, if you wanted to integrate them all, they'd have to decide on one software platform. You know what I mean? I mean, I know I've talked to you before, I think you come from a technology, yeah. So, so it's incremental.
Could unify everything as possible, but that requires political power across jurisdictions.
Yeah,
And people just showing up to meet with each other and talk about, like Jason said, the valley's gotta have the same thing as the DOT as the city. Or at least some sort of way to integrate all those bits and pieces. Not to mention STA and all the work that they've put in.
yeah. Anyone else online or?
Just for the sake of conversation, Jason,
Yeah.
what happens if we don't complete this plan?
Well, you know
The
that.
sky falls.
Well, one of the requirements, us being a metropolitan planning organization is to update this plan every 4 to 5 years. And that is tied to federal funding because we have federal funds that flow through this region. And if you don't have a long range plan that's up to date, that'll create a regulatory issue in terms of getting that funding. So that's one of the, I guess, hooks, I guess you could say, for completing the plan. So it's a requirement, of course, but we also like to think we're not just checking a box. We're hopefully having broader conversations with our board of directors who meet in here once a month. And the public stakeholders, other stakeholders, to understand what our needs are, so we can better plan and focus those investments over time, because there's only so much transportation money to go around, and that's becoming increasingly, I guess, constrained, I would say. So when we are investing in something, we want to make sure we're doing the right thing, getting the most benefit out of what we're investing in.
Yeah, it's a significant amount of money that federal government sends
Mhm.
back to states when they collect it from states, and then they send it back to states.
Yeah.
And it is important to know that a region has a plan that makes sense, that people collectively agree to, as opposed to a lot of scattershot activity going on, right? We've actually evaluated different projects and tried to select in advance the ones that will have the most meaningful impact in this region. So I think that's reasonable expectation for government to have.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Kelly. Yeah, one thing kind of just basic housekeeping thing. So if you go to our website, srtc.org, you'll see ways you can navigate to get to the Horizon 2050 draft. And so you can look at in PDF form, chapters 1 through 4. There's also a foreword, there's appendices, and an executive summary. But the main content is in those 4 chapters. And yeah, so take a look at that if you haven't had a chance, or if you have some time to do some reading. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. I don't know that there's any more questions online. Doesn't appear so. I know that one of our audience members has logged off, so.
Thanks, Jason. I'm gonna log off too.
Okay. Yeah,
Good job.
I might hang out. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. It's nice to see our federal partners on the phone, so that was good.
Yeah. Okay, see ya.
Jason, maybe just in passing, we can talk a little bit more about some of the upcoming project studies and activities, like the I-90 corridor study and what the scope of that will be throughout the region, whether that's constrained in the urban area or the whole county, and the upcoming work that folks have to look forward to that will be reminiscent of that.
Yeah, and from that I-90 piece of things, I would say there's still scoping to do for that, and probably quite a bit of scoping to decide exactly what the breadth of that study will be. But really what it will be is an effort to look at I-90 as a whole. We get some feedback from folks who say, well, I-90 is a problem over here, and some who say it's I-10 is a problem over here. So we want to do kind of a broader corridor study to see, what could we do if we made some improvements or recommendations both on I-90 and also off corridor as well. That will be a consideration. So we have a kind of a strategy that everyone can agree on going forward when it comes to I-90. And I don't know the timing of that, Lois, is.
So I think in 2026, we're gonna start to work through some of the scoping questions. How much can we really do with the amount of money that our board has set aside for that work? And then probably near the end of the year, we'll start to potentially go out for bid, go out for advertisement, but it'll definitely be the latter part.
Yeah. Yeah, is there other things you had in mind, Michael?
No, I just wanted to stoke some conversation and, you know, I know that their MTP is a reference document for other agencies when they're looking for regional consistency and what our emphasis areas are as a greater region. You know, I think one of the purposes of the document as well, and why it's so important to keep it updated, is that people are looking to it as that, how should I put it, you know, a paragon document, right? When they're looking at their own plans, or when they're looking at what they would like to do on a more local level, that we provide, frankly, some guidance to agencies throughout the region, indirectly through MTP consistency, in that, you know, it's important to keep that updated. I didn't really have any other deeper points necessarily to hone in on,
Yeah.
just to talk more about what's coming and what folks can look forward to.
Can I?
Oh, yeah, please.
I think to your point, Michael, you know, this long range plan is so big. And it, when we think about what is really needed on a project level scale, you know, the list that Jason started to talk about, those come out of more specific studies, right? So we supported the Department of Transportation on a study for US 2 out in the West Plains. And there's a lot of recommended projects from that. Some of the projects on here are extending from a study from back in 2002, Bridging the Valley, right? How are we going to continue to have important corridors go over the railroad tracks, A, to improve safety, and B, to keep freight moving, and not have significant delays. We engaged and led a study on US 195 and I-90 to talk about the challenges on and specific projects were recommended. Jason mentioned the Regional Safety Action Plan. So over time, we do these smaller projects and they feed into the next update of our long range plan. And then when we're developing this long range plan, really trying to get people to look far out into the future. Then we say, all right, in order to get there, what other planning do we have to do? So this is fed by plans, then it generates ideas for additional plans that we go forward and get more of that detail and continue to try and move in that direction. You know, a big one is how we transition our existing system to a more modern world. And a good example of that is the Division Street. You know, we talk about Division Bus Rapid Transit, but it is way more than just a transit project, right? This was our main north-south corridor. And once we have that, the MSC interstate corridor built, a lot of that traffic that's just trying to get to I-90 will move. And how can we have and redesign that corridor to better serve the commercial and residential development that's along it? You know, it doesn't have to be the way it is today. It can be safer, it can still move lots of trips, but it can certainly serve transit, infill housing, so there's a lot to that. If you think about some of the micro mobility that we call it, you know, line scooters and drones and package delivery, how does our system change to incorporate line scooters and bikes and all of these other activities? You know, in an urban area like this, it's not always very friendly, right? And that results in a lot of injuries and fatalities. So how do we retrofit, which becomes very expensive? So
Yeah.
certainly a lot to consider.
Did you happen to go to the transportation summit event?
The breakfast.
The breakfast event?
Was, no, I couldn't.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna, so we had a keynote speaker, a guy from Brookings Metro, and you know, looking forward, there's the technology aspect of things, and that's, you know, kind of exciting, and there's some potential there. There's also still a lot of just sort of basic stuff that, kind of steel and concrete kind of stuff, because we built a lot of our infrastructure, a few decades ago, some major, Lake Tahoe Valley bridges and I-90 viaduct and things like that. And I think a term the keynote speaker used is the bill is coming due, in terms of just preserving those structures and pavement condition and those kind of things are becoming an increasing challenge. It's not unique to Spokane, but it's really kind of across the US in many ways. Because there was a pretty large infrastructure buildings free for 2 decades there after World War II. And now, again, to borrow his term, the bill is coming due in terms of, rehabilitating that stuff. Well, anything else? Okay, you're good? All right.
We invite you to sign in if you'd like.
Yeah, there's, if you could,
Angela, what about you? You're kind of new to this.
Like if I have any
You've
questions,
seen,
Yeah.
you've seen this presentation a couple of times, so
yeah, I
maybe
mean,
you don't have any more questions.
there's always more questions. I think that there's always basic ones like, what is the actual biggest problem that we're dealing with and what do you think it is? You know, I like to ask people that because you always get really funny answers. And that are experienced or not experienced with situations with cancer.
Well, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Michael, what do you think one of our bigger problems or challenges is?
Well, I think that Jason and you have mentioned that in its preservation operations over the horizon span of like 50 years, one other activity that's not necessarily in the MTP, although it does feed into our long range plan and is mentioned in the long range plan, is looking at infrastructure condition, including bridge condition. And National Bridge Inventory is released towards the end of the summer. And as part of that update of that data, one thing I've been taking a look at is the rate of degradation for facilities and how that varies when there are more freeze-thaw cycles, like how you compare that for, say, Arizona or Florida, for instance, or they have their own problems. But versus, one of the studies I was looking at is in North Idaho, which has a very similar, relatively comparable climate to where we live. And we know that that rate of degradation, the more bridges you allow to sag into fair condition, it doesn't pose a problem immediately, it doesn't raise alarm bells, but when you get a swelling there, as there has been around the state, I should say, and in some areas worse than the Spokane region, but that will ultimately lead to more infrastructure that's going to need more fixes, more preservation, more replacement of pavement down the line. And when you talk about constrained funding in the environment that we're in, I think that will be something that will be a serious issue in the next 20 or 30 years looking forward. So even if it doesn't necessarily jump out right now as something that's stopping getting to point A to point B, it does not take many bridges going out of service or key corridors that produce lanes before people really take note. I don't know if that's the number one, but it's certainly up there at the top, and I think our public polling showed that it's a concern that is on a number of people's minds as well.
Yeah, and I think you really touched on a lot of different points. One is just the state of good repair question and the least cost. What is the term I'm thinking? I'm drawing blank. Least costs.
Strategy.
Yeah. We put off maintenance to the point where now a bridge has to have a replacement rather than continuing along the way. And we are not moving towards the least cost, right? And you don't do that in any other part of your life, right? You rotate your tires because you want them to last for the 60 or whatever 1,000 miles they're supposed to. And we aren't doing that now. Yeah.
Life cycle cost.
Yeah. Well, least cost or lowest cost, life cycle cost. And we're way behind the curve. But the other thing you mentioned that I think is super interesting is just sort of the benchmarking aspect of what we do. And I keep asking for, you know, and challenging DOT with that question, like, how do we rate compared to, and I don't mean that in a judgmental way, but, you know, your point of, yeah, our maintenance costs are much higher. Our geography has some challenges to it. And each geography has something different, but asphalt does not do well in the north. You know, so it is reasonable to expect that costs to maintain the system are going to be higher, per mile or per lane mile basis. But I never see those kind of benchmark to peer groups. And Angela, you know, and Jason, you probably know too, in transit, through the National Transit Database, information is submitted every single year, and that information and data is audited. And you can go and choose peer organizations and do all this great benchmarking work where you can see where you're starting to lose track of something and go in and try to figure out why. And I feel like that is a missed opportunity in our world of transportation, which I wish we did more of. Yeah. Jason, what do you think things to do?
Well, I'd probably echo Michael's.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for coming by. And, yeah, this is probably our final fully kind of public event thing, but our upcoming meetings are also open to the public if you haven't been. And our committee and board level are also open to the public if you care to, you know, continue to track progress, either by Zoom or in person.
Yeah. Keeping tabs on all the projects for here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we published the public comment and I think the DOT, so you could wait.
Sorry,
For posterity.
Okay, I'll do work here.
Thank you so much.
Well,